The stale air of the office clung to Alex as he pushed open the door to his silent apartment. It was just past 7 on a Friday evening, the city lights of Chicago beginning to sparkle beyond the windows of his 9th-floor condo. The emptiness echoed. Sarah, his wife, had left for her parents' place in Ohio yesterday after one of their increasingly frequent arguments. Another clash over the suffocating routine of bills, work stress, and the unspoken disappointments that seemed to pile up like unopened mail. He hadn't fought her departure. A temporary ceasefire felt like relief, a chance to breathe unfiltered air. He'd stopped on the way home, picking up a 6-pack of lager, a family-sized bag of salt and vinegar chips, and some jerky. The essentials for a solitary night of gaming oblivion. His buddy Mike had finally returned his PlayStation after borrowing it for months, and Alex was itching to lose himself in digital worlds, far removed from spreadsheets and silent dinners. But the moment the heavy door clicked shut behind him, locking out the distant hum of traffic, a distinct unease settled over Alex like a damp cloak. It wasn't fear, precisely, but a profound sense of wrongness. A prickling at the nape of his neck that had his shoulders tensing involuntarily. He scanned the open-plan living area, the gray sectional facing the large TV, the minimalist bookshelf mostly filled with Sarah's novels, the balcony door reflecting the fading twilight. Everything was in its meticulously ordered place, exactly as he'd left it this morning. Was it just the residue of the argument? Lingering work stress? Or maybe the sudden shift in barometric pressure he'd heard mentioned on the drive home? He shook his head, dismissing it as fatigue. "Get a grip, man," he muttered to the empty room, the sound of his own voice strangely loud. He dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the metallic clatter sharp in the stillness. Shedding his jacket, he carried his provisions to the kitchen island. The silence felt heavy, watchful. He cracked open a beer, the hiss unnaturally loud, and took a long swallow, the cold liquid doing little to dispel the creeping disquiet. He plugged in the PlayStation, the familiar chime a small comfort, and popped in the first disc that came to hand, an old, chaotic racing game. Slumping onto the couch, controller in hand, he tried to lose himself in the pixelated roar of engines and screeching tires. Time blurred. The digital dashboard clock might have read 10:30 p.m. when the first sound shattered his concentration. It came from the spare room down the short hallway, Sarah's home office, currently unused. A distinct, solid thump, like a heavy book falling flat onto the carpet. Alex paused the game, the sudden silence amplifying his own heartbeat. "Damn cats," he grumbled aloud, picturing Mittens and Shadow, their 2 lazy tabbies. One was probably trying to jump onto the desk and knocked something over. Heaving himself off the couch, he padded down the hallway, flicking on the light as he entered the office. The room was meticulously tidy, as Sarah preferred it. No fallen books, no scattered papers, no sign of feline mischief at all. He scanned the floor, the desk, the bookshelves. Nothing out of place. Puzzled, he checked behind the door. Empty. A quick glance confirmed both cats were elsewhere. Mittens was curled atop the refrigerator in the kitchen, a favorite perch, and Shadow was a dark lump snoozing on the back of the living room armchair. "What the hell?" Alex muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. He checked the electrical outlets near the desk, half expecting a spark or a pop, but they were cool and silent. The window was securely latched, the glass unblemished. No evidence of a bird strike or anything from outside. He stood in the center of the room, the silence now feeling accusatory. The thump had been solid, real, It hadn't sounded like it came from the apartment above or below. It had resonated here. With a frustrated sigh, he turned off the light and retreated to the living room, leaving the door open. He cranked the volume on the racing game, trying to drown out the lingering unease with engine noise. It's been nearly 2 months now. The nights have been quiet. The lights stay on. The cats have returned to their usual spots, but Alex still feels it sometimes. That prickle at the back of his neck when he enters the apartment alone. He double-checks the locks obsessively. He avoids looking at the wall behind the poster. He rarely stays home alone overnight if Sarah is away. He makes excuses to visit Mike or works late. The rational part of him clings to the superintendent's vague explanation. A freak electrical surge, a bizarre thermal reaction. But the image of that charred, patterned stain, the smell of ozone and burnt plastic, the memory of the absolute darkness in his apartment, and the fleeting sense of movement within it are seared into his memory just as indelibly. He doesn't know what happened that night. He doesn't know if it was some bizarre confluence of natural events, a transient glitch in reality, or something else. He only knows that the comfortable certainty of his world cracked open, revealing a glimpse of something dark and inexplicable lurking just beyond the edge of perception. And some doors, once opened, cannot be fully closed again. He avoids the spare room. He sleeps with a light on. And he never, ever forgets to buy cigarettes before nightfall. Less than 10 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the sound from the office was different. A rapid, dry scritch, 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 like something heavy being dragged very quickly across the carpet for no more than a second. It wasn't the scrape of furniture. It was too brief, too deliberate. Alex froze mid-corner on the screen, his avatar careening into a digital wall. The controller grew slick in his hands. This wasn't cats. This wasn't the building settling. This was something else. The prickling sensation at his neck intensified into a cold dread that seeped down his spine. He muted the game. The silence was absolute, thick and waiting. He strained his ears, hearing only the frantic thudding of his own pulse. The idea of going back down that hallway, back into that room, filled him with a profound, visceral reluctance. Gritting his teeth, Alex forced himself to move. He didn't walk. He practically lunged for the hallway light switch, flooding the corridor with harsh brightness. Heart hammering against his ribs, he stepped into the doorway of the office and flipped its light on again. His eyes darted everywhere. The desk chair was precisely tucked in. The rug lay flat. The books stood in orderly rows. No disturbance. He crouched, examining the carpet fibers near where the sound had seemed to originate. Nothing. No indentations, no scuff marks. He even got down on his hands and knees, peering under the desk. Dust bunnies and a stray pen cap. That was it. "This is insane," he whispered, his voice shaky. 2 beers? That's nothing. But the denial felt hollow. He left both the hallway and office lights blazing, a feeble defense against the encroaching strangeness. Back on the couch, the racing game held no appeal. The half-finished beer tasted flat and sour. The apartment no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap, every shadow holding its breath. He sat rigidly, staring not at the screen, but at the brightly lit hallway entrance, his senses painfully alert. The digital clock on the cable box ticked over slowly. 11:15, 11:47, 12:03, 4 a.m. His pack of cigarettes was empty. The sudden craving was overwhelming, a physical need cutting through the fog of fear and sleeplessness. He needed air, movement, escape from these four walls that seemed to press in on him. Outside, he thought. Streetlights, people, normalcy. It was early May. The Chicago night wouldn't be cold, just crisp. His usual route to the all-night convenience store cut through the complex's well-lit internal courtyards, and then a short alleyway separating his building from a shuttered daycare center. Not the most scenic, but generally safe, especially at this hour when even the nightlife was winding down. He grabbed his keys and a thin windbreaker, locking the apartment door carefully behind him. The elevator felt too confined. He took the stairs, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the concrete stairwell. Emerging into the courtyard, the cool night air was a relief, washing over his face. The path was dimly lit by ornate lampposts, casting long, distorted shadows. Every rustle of leaves in the meticulously landscaped bushes made him jump. A discarded soda can crunched under his sneaker, and he stifled a yelp. "Get it together, Alex," he chastised himself, feeling foolish. "You're 32, not 12. He quickened his pace, his nerves stretched taut. The trip to the store was uneventful, a blur of harsh fluorescent lights, the bored cashier, and the mundane transaction. Holding the fresh pack of cigarettes felt grounding. The walk back started similarly, though his heightened senses made every sound seem amplified. The distant wail of a siren, the hum of a late-night delivery truck. He entered the alleyway, narrower and darker than the courtyards, the high walls of the apartment building and the daycare blocking most of the ambient light. He was halfway through when a feral streak of black and white exploded from under a dumpster near the daycare fence, barely 3 feet in front of him. It was just a scrawny stray cat, spooked and bolting, but Alex's reaction was pure, adrenalized terror. He stumbled backward, a choked gasp escaping him, his heart slamming against his breastbone like a trapped bird. The cat vanished into the darkness. Before his pulse could even begin to slow, a chorus of yowls and hisses erupted from the bushes lining the daycare side. A territorial spat between unseen feline residents. The sudden cacophony in the confined space shattered his remaining composure. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air, and the earlier dread surged back, stronger, colder. He practically ran the remaining length of the alley, bursting out into the brighter courtyard surrounding his building. Taking deep, shuddering breaths, he leaned against a brick planter, fumbling a cigarette out of the pack with trembling fingers. He lit it, the familiar acrid smoke offering a thin veil of comfort. He gazed up at the imposing facade of his building, his eyes instinctively seeking the windows of his 9th-floor condo. Most windows were dark, but a few glowed with the bluish light of TVs or bedside lamps. His own windows were utterly, profoundly black. Ice water seemed to flood his veins. He hadn't turned off the lights. He distinctly remembered leaving the hallway and office lights blazing, a defiant barrier against the unknown. The living room light had been on when he left, yet now his apartment was a dark rectangle against the building's face, indistinguishable from the other unoccupied units. And then, movement. A subtle shifting within that absolute darkness, like a denser shadow detaching itself from the deeper black near the center of the living room window. It was fleeting, impossible to define, but undeniably there. His rational mind screamed impossibility, from the ground, 9 stories up, at night, through an unlit room. But the primal part of his brain, the part attuned to predators and unseen threats, recognized it instantly. Something was in there. something was moving in his dark apartment. The cigarette fell from his nerveless fingers, smoldering on the pavement. His legs felt weak. The urge to run anywhere but towards that dark maw in the skyline was overwhelming. He wasn't a coward, he told himself desperately, just rationally averse to confronting potential home-invading phantoms alone at 4:30 a.m. He sank onto the cold, concrete lip of the planter, wrapping his arms around himself, suddenly feeling the chill. He needed backup. He needed another set of eyes, another rational mind to confirm or dispel the terror clawing at his insides. He reached into his windbreaker pocket for his phone. Empty. Panic flared anew. He patted down his jeans. Nothing. He must have left it on the kitchen counter in his haste to escape earlier. Perfect, he groaned, dropping his head into his hands. He was stranded, freezing, staring up at the dark eye of his own apartment, convinced something stared back. He waited, shivering, for what felt like an eternity, scanning the courtyard entrance for any sign of a neighbor, a security guard, anyone. The sky began to lighten imperceptibly in the east, washing the stars with pale gray. Just as despair threatened to engulf him, a familiar figure rounded the corner. Mike, bleary-eyed but clutching two large coffees, his old college buddy who lived only a 10-minute drive away and answered desperate pre-dawn calls without too many questions. Mike took one look at Alex's ashen face, the tremor in his hands as he accepted the coffee, and the haunted glance he kept throwing upwards, and his usual easy grin vanished. Jesus, Alex, you look like you saw a ghost, or fought one. What's going on? Your text was cryptic. Mike followed Alex's gaze up to the 9th floor. Your lights are out. I know, Alex croaked, the hot coffee barely registering. He quickly recounted the night, the inexplicable sounds, the fruitless searches, the escalating dread, the trip for cigarettes, the stray cat scare, and finally, the dark windows and the glimpse of movement. He emphasized leaving all the lights on. Mike listened intently, his initial skepticism warring with concern for his clearly shaken friend. Okay, Mike said slowly, setting his coffee down. Okay, weird noises, check. Spooky dark apartment, check. Possible shadow figure, that's new. He rubbed his jaw. Look, it could be a power surge tripped the breaker. Old building, right? And the movement, tricks of the light, fatigue, stress. Sarah leaving, it's messing with your head, man. Alex started to protest, but Mike held up a hand. But, better safe than sorry. Let's go check it out, together. He walked back to his car, parked nearby, and returned with a heavy-duty Maglite flashlight. Brought this just in case. Lead the way. The climb up 9 flights of stairs in the silent pre-dawn building felt like an ascent into the unknown. Alex's legs burned. His breath came in short gasps, but it was the tension coiling in his gut that was worse. Mike, more athletic, kept pace, his expression grimly determined. They paused on the 9th floor landing, the silence absolute except for their own breathing. Alex strained his ears. Was that a faint rustling sound from behind his door? A low whisper, almost below the threshold of hearing? He grabbed Mike's arm. You hear that? Mike tilted his head, listening intently for a long moment. He shook his head. Nothing, man. Just the building settling or maybe pipes. You're wired. He hefted the Maglite. Ready? Alex fumbled with his keys, his hands trembling so badly he dropped them. Mike picked them up, unlocked the deadbolt, and slowly pushed the door open. Alex reached inside, fingers searching blindly for the light switch plate in the entryway. He found it, flipped the switch. Nothing happened. The small foyer remained shrouded in gloom, illuminated only by the dim emergency exit sign at the end of the hall and the faint pre-dawn light filtering through the living room windows. "Breaker must be tripped," Mike said, his voice tight. He clicked on the mag light. The powerful beam cut through the darkness, illuminating swirling dust motes. Alex followed, using his phone's weaker flashlight. The beam swept across the foyer floor, revealing glittering shards. "Glass," Mike murmured, training his light downwards. "Lamp blue?" Alex moved the beam upwards. The bulb in the entryway fixture was shattered, filaments dangling. But that wasn't all. As they cautiously moved down the short hallway towards the living room, Mike's beam swept the walls. The bulbs in the hallway sconces were also shattered. Every single bulb they could see, even those in fixtures that had been switched off earlier, like the one in the kitchen, lay in pieces on the floor below. It wasn't just a tripped breaker. It was deliberate, violent destruction. They reached the doorway to the living room. Alex's phone beam, shaking visibly now, swept across the familiar space. The coffee table was askew. The bag of chips lay spilled on the rug. A decorative vase had been knocked over, water soaking into the carpet. The PlayStation controller lay near the couch, its cord stretched taut. It looked like the aftermath of a frantic struggle, not a burglary. Nothing valuable seemed disturbed, just displaced. Mike's beam traveled slowly across the far wall of the living room, opposite the balcony. It froze. "Alex." Mike's voice was a hoarse whisper, stripped of all its earlier bravado. "What the hell is that?" Alex directed his trembling light to where Mike's beam held steady. On the pale gray wall, in the corner near the ceiling, was a stain, but not like water damage or mold. It was roughly circular, perhaps 3 feet in diameter. The wallpaper within its boundaries wasn't just stained, it looked charred, as if subjected to intense, localized heat. The pattern was bubbled and blackened, the edges oddly crisp, radiating outwards in faint, wavy lines. The air near it held a faint, acrid tang, like ozone and burnt plastic, completely alien to the apartment's usual smells. It wasn't smoke damage. It looked like something had seared its mark directly onto the wall. The sheer wrongness of it, the impossibility, hit Alex like a physical blow. This wasn't faulty wiring. This wasn't his imagination. This was something else entirely. Mike took an involuntary step back, bumping into Alex. The beam of the mag light wavered. "We need to get out of here. Now." There was no argument, no false courage. The primal fear radiating from that mark on the wall was contagious and absolute. They backed out slowly, not turning their backs on the darkened living room and that impossible stain until they were through the front door, which Mike slammed shut with more force than necessary. They didn't speak as they descended the stairs, the echo of their footsteps a frantic counterpoint to the hammering of their hearts. They emerged into the cool, gray light of dawn, the ordinary sounds of the waking city, a jarring contrast to the silent horror they'd just witnessed. They sat on a low brick wall in the courtyard, the untouched coffees cold beside them. Alex smoked cigarette after cigarette, his hands finally steadying only slightly. Mike stared straight ahead, his face pale. They talked in low, urgent tones, not about the shattered bulbs or the displaced furniture, but about that mark. That charred, impossible pattern seared into the wall. They swapped stories they'd heard, whispered accounts of unexplained phenomena, strange energies, things that defied logic. Rational explanations crumbled against the visceral memory of that sight, that smell. The rising sun did little to dispel the deep chill that had settled in their bones. Eventually, they went back inside the building, but only as far as the lobby. Alex called the building superintendent, spinning a story about a possible electrical malfunction and strange burning smells. The super, a skeptical older man, found the tripped breaker and reset it. He examined the blown bulbs with a frown, muttering about power surges and cheap fixtures. When Alex hesitantly mentioned the stain, the super went up alone. He came down looking perplexed, but dismissive. "Just some weird scorch mark," he'd said, scratching his head. "Looks like something got too close to the wall. Maybe a space heater malfunctioned? Wiring behind the wall shorted? We'll get an electrician to check the circuits next week. I wouldn't worry about it." He offered no explanation for the pattern, the localized burn without an apparent source. He didn't seem to see the same terrifying wrongness they had. Alex found Mittens and Shadow 2 days later, huddled together deep behind the kitchen cabinets, unharmed but trembling, refusing to come out for food. It took hours to coax them. The stain on the wall remained. Alex covered it with a large framed poster, unable to bear looking at it. He cleaned up the glass, righted the furniture, and erased the superficial signs of struggle. When Sarah returned, cheerful and refreshed from her time away, he said nothing. The truth was too bizarre, too unsettling, too likely to spark another fight about stress or imagination. Only Mike knew the full story. The electrician found nothing wrong with the wiring,